I was sitting at my kitchen table in Scottsdale, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when I heard the knock at the door that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I had just returned from a 2-week business trip to Singapore. The jet lag was still hitting me hard, but I dragged myself to the front door, expecting maybe a package delivery or a neighbor asking about something mundane. Instead, I found myself face to face with a sheriff's deputy holding a clipboard and a woman with severely highlighted blonde hair, arms crossed, wearing a blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." The deputy looked uncomfortable. The woman looked triumphant. "Xavier Armstrong?" the deputy asked, glancing at his paperwork. "That's me," I said, suddenly very awake. "What's this about?" "Sir, I'm here to execute a foreclosure order on this property. You need to vacate the premises immediately." I stared at him, then at the woman, then back at him. "I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. I own this house outright. No mortgage, no liens, nothing. I paid cash for it 3 years ago." The woman stepped forward, her smile so smug I wanted to wipe it off her face. "Mr. Armstrong, I'm Barbara Jenkins, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. Your property has been foreclosed upon due to unpaid HOA fees and fines totaling over $15,000. You were notified multiple times and you failed to respond. The law is on our side." "I've never received any notices from the HOA," I said, my voice rising, "and I've paid every single assessment on time through my bank's automatic payment system. This is absolutely insane." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "According to our records, the property at 4782 Desert Bloom Lane has not paid fees in 18 months. The board voted to foreclose, we followed proper legal procedures, and the court granted our petition. This house now belongs to the Sunset Ridge HOA. I live at 4782 Desert Bloom Drive, not Lane," I said slowly, my heart pounding. "You foreclosed on the wrong house." The deputy looked down at his paperwork, then at Barbara, then at the house number on my door. I watched his face go pale. Barbara snatched the papers from his hand, scanning them quickly. Her confident expression flickered for just a moment before she recovered. "The address on the court order says Lane," she said defensively. "We followed the proper process. If there was an error, that's not the HOA's responsibility." "Not your responsibility?" I was incredulous now. "You just tried to kick me out of my own house because you can't read a street sign, and you think that's not your responsibility?" The deputy cleared his throat. "Madam, if this is the wrong address, we can't execute this foreclosure order. Sir, I apologize for the confusion. You should contact an attorney." Barbara's face was turning red. "The HOA will not be held liable for a simple clerical error. These things happen. Just be grateful we discovered the mistake before anything permanent occurred." "Nothing permanent?" I felt my blood pressure skyrocketing. "You tried to steal my house. You got a court order. If I hadn't been home, what would have happened? Would you have changed my locks? Sold my property?" "We followed the law," Barbara said stiffly. "Good day, Mr. Armstrong." She turned on her heel and marched back to her silver Lexus SUV parked in my driveway. The deputy gave me an apologetic look and handed me a copy of the foreclosure order before following her. I stood in my doorway, shaking with anger and adrenaline, staring at the legal document in my hands. The papers clearly stated 4782 Desert Bloom Lane as the property being foreclosed upon. But the legal description, the GPS coordinates, everything else on the document pointed to my house on Desert Bloom Drive. Someone at the HOA had mixed up the addresses, but they had been so eager to foreclose that they hadn't bothered to double-check the most basic information. I went back inside and immediately called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who I'd used for the house purchase in my business contracts. He answered on the third ring. "Xavier, how was Singapore?" "Forget Singapore. I just had the HOA try to foreclose on my house. The wrong house. They mixed up Lane and Drive." There was a pause. "They actually showed up with a sheriff to evict you?" 10 minutes ago. Marcus, they had a court order. They went through the entire foreclosure process on the wrong property." "Did you let them in? Did you sign anything?" "No and no. The deputy figured out the address was wrong, and the HOA president just said it wasn't their responsibility and left." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Xavier, this is bad. Really bad. For them, I mean. They just committed wrongful foreclosure, probably fraud, definitely violated your property rights. If they actually foreclosed on your property in court, that's on public record now. It could affect your title, your credit, everything. What do I do? Don't do anything yet. Don't contact the HOA. Let me pull the court records and see exactly what happened. I'll call you back in a few hours. I spent the rest of the morning pacing my house, too agitated to do anything productive. My home office looked out over the backyard where I'd spent thousands of dollars on landscaping and a custom pool. I'd been so proud of this house when I bought it. At 35, I'd finally made enough from my software consulting business to buy my dream property outright, no debt, no strings attached. And now some HOA tyrant had tried to take it away because she couldn't tell the difference between a street and a lane. Marcus called back around 2 in the afternoon. His voice was grim. Xavier, it's worse than I thought. The HOA filed for foreclosure 6 months ago. The property on Desert Bloom Lane, the one they were actually trying to foreclose on, it's owned by an elderly woman named Dorothy Humphrey, who apparently stopped paying her HOA fees after her husband died. But someone at the HOA, and I mean someone who should have known better, mixed up the property descriptions in all the legal filings. How does that even happen? Incompetence, laziness, who knows? But here's the thing. They served notice to your address. The foreclosure notice, the court hearings, everything was sent to 4782 Desert Bloom Drive. I never got any of that mail, I said. I've been traveling a lot for work, but my mail gets held at the post office and I pick it up. I would have seen legal notices. Were you out of the country when these would have been sent? I thought back. I was in Tokyo for 3 weeks in October. Then I had a project in London in December. But I set up mail forwarding to my P.O. box. They may have required signature confirmation. If no one was there to sign, the notices might have been returned. But that's their problem, not yours. You can't be held responsible for not receiving mail that was sent to the wrong address about the wrong property. So what happens now? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Now we make them pay for every single thing they did wrong. Xavier, they didn't just make a mistake. They filed false documents with the court. They obtained a foreclosure order on a property that doesn't owe them a dime. They sent a sheriff to evict you from your home. This is going to affect your title report, your credit report, your peace of mind, and they need to be held accountable. I want to sue them, I said. I want everyone involved to understand that you can't just steal someone's house and call it a clerical error. Then that's what we'll do. I'm going to file an emergency motion to have the foreclosure order vacated. Then we're going to file a lawsuit for wrongful foreclosure, slander of title, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and anything else I can think of. I'm also going to ask for punitive damages because this level of negligence needs to be punished. Do it, whatever it costs. This is going to get expensive, Xavier. Litigation like this could run you $50,000 or more. I don't care. They tried to take my home. I want them to pay for every dollar I lose, every hour of stress, everything. Understood. I'll get started on the paperwork today. In the meantime, document everything. If anyone from the HOA contacts you, don't engage. Send them to me. And start keeping a journal of how this is affecting you emotionally and professionally. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat down and tried to process what was happening. I'd heard horror stories about HOAs, but I'd never imagined I'd be living one. The Sunset Ridge. HOA had always seemed reasonable enough. They kept the common areas maintained, organized a few neighborhood events, handled the pool and the clubhouse. I'd paid my dues without complaint, attended exactly 0 board meetings, and generally ignored them unless I got an email about something. But now they'd revealed themselves to be something much more sinister. An organization with enough power to file legal action, obtain court orders, and attempt to seize private property, all while being run by people too incompetent or too careless to verify a basic street address. I opened my laptop and started documenting everything I could remember about the morning. The time the deputy arrived, Barbara's exact words, the look on her face when she realized the mistake but refused to accept responsibility. I took photos of the foreclosure order, the deputy's card, everything I had. Then I started going through my financial records. I pulled up 18 months of bank statements and highlighted every single HOA payment I'd made. Automatic withdrawal, same amount, same day of every month, not a single missed payment. I printed everything out and put it in a folder for Marcus. My phone rang around dinner time. It was my best friend Eric, who lived 2 streets over in the same development. Dude, I just heard the craziest rumor. Someone said the HOA tried to foreclose on your house. Not a rumor, it happened this morning. What, are you serious? Why? I explained the whole situation while heating up some leftover Thai food I'd ordered the night before. Eric listened, occasionally interjecting with disbelief and profanity. That's insane, he said when I finished. Barbara Jenkins is a nightmare. She fined me $200 last year because my trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I took them out the night before pickup because I was leaving early for work, and apparently that violated the covenants. She literally drives around the neighborhood looking for violations. She's about to have bigger problems than trash cans, I said. My attorney is going after them for everything. Good. Someone needs to take her down a notch. The HOA board has been getting more aggressive lately. They fined the Hendersons $3,000 because they painted their house the wrong shade of beige. Beige! It was like 2 shades off from the approved color palette. That's ridiculous. That's Barbara. She takes this stuff personally. I heard she wanted to foreclose on the Humphrey house because Dorothy stopped showing up to neighborhood events after her husband died. Like, the woman is grieving, and Barbara's mad she's not coming to the summer barbecue anymore. Wait, the Humphrey house is the one they were actually trying to foreclose on. Yeah, Dorothy lives on Desert Bloom Lane, about 3 blocks from you. Nice lady. Her husband Robert died about 2 years ago. I heard she got behind on her fees, but I didn't know they were trying to take her house. Something clicked in my mind. Eric, if they mixed up the addresses in the foreclosure filing, does that mean Dorothy has no idea this is happening? Probably not. If they were sending all the notices to your address, she wouldn't have gotten anything. So she thinks she's safe, but there's an active foreclosure case against her property and she doesn't even know it. Oh man, that's messed up. After I hung up with Eric, I sat in my living room feeling sick. This wasn't just about me anymore. There was an elderly widow somewhere in my neighborhood who was about to lose her house, and she had no idea because the HOA was so incompetent they'd been notifying the wrong person for months. I called Marcus back. I need you to look into something. The property they were actually trying to foreclose on, 4782 Desert Bloom Lane. The owner is named Dorothy Humphrey. If all the notices went to my address, she doesn't know what's happening. You're right, Marcus said. And if the HOA realizes their mistake, they might try to rush through a proper foreclosure before she has time to respond. Can we warn her? We can, but we need to be careful. We don't want to interfere with her legal rights or create any conflicts. Let me see if I can find her contact information and reach out professionally. If she needs help, I can refer her to someone who specializes in foreclosure defense. Do it. I don't want her losing her house because of this mess. You're a good person, Xavier. A lot of people would just focus on their own situation. It's not about being good. It's about doing what's right. The next few days were a blur of legal activity. Marcus filed the emergency motion to vacate the foreclosure order on my property. He also reached out to Dorothy Humphrey and discovered that she had no idea she was in foreclosure proceedings. Her mail had been piling up. She'd been dealing with depression after her husband's death, and she'd simply stopped checking her HOA account. She owed about $8,000 in back fees and fines. Marcus referred her to a colleague who specialized in foreclosure defense, and they immediately filed a motion to dismiss the foreclosure case against her property on the grounds that she'd never been properly served. Since all the notices had gone to my address, the HOA had failed to follow proper legal procedure. Meanwhile, the HOA realized they had a serious problem. Their attorney, a guy named Richard Moss, who apparently handled a dozen HOA accounts around Scottsdale, filed a motion to dismiss the foreclosure case against my property and requested that the order be vacated. He included a brief explanation that there had been an administrative error regarding the property address. Marcus opposed the motion, arguing that it wasn't enough to simply dismiss the case. The HOA needed to affirmatively clear my title, remove any reference to the foreclosure from public records, and compensate me for the damages they'd caused. We had a hearing scheduled in Maricopa County Superior Court 3 weeks after the attempted eviction. Marcus prepared me for what to expect, but nothing really prepared me for walking into that courtroom and seeing Barbara Jenkins sitting at the defendant's table with her attorney, looking annoyed rather than ashamed. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Patricia Romano. She read through the motions with a deepening frown, occasionally looking up at the HOA's attorney with what I could only describe as disbelief. "Counselor," she said to Richard Moss, "help me understand how your clients obtained a foreclosure order on a property that didn't owe them any money." Richard Moss stood, adjusting his tie. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous energy. "Your Honor, there was an unfortunate mix-up between two properties with similar addresses, Desert Bloom Lane and Desert Bloom Drive. The property descriptions were correct, but the street address in some of the filings was incorrect. The HOA relied on information provided by their property management company, and errors occurred." "Errors," Judge Romano repeated flatly. "Mr. Moss, your client sent a sheriff to evict Mr. Armstrong from his home, a home he owns free and clear, a home on which he has never missed an HOA payment. Do you understand the gravity of what occurred?" "We do, Your Honor. The HOA deeply regrets the confusion and is prepared to take all necessary steps to correct the record." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, if I may, this wasn't confusion. This was negligence at best, and fraud at worst. The Sunset Ridge HOA filed documents with this court that contained false information. They obtained a court order based on those false documents. They attempted to execute that order, which would have resulted in my client being unlawfully evicted from his home. And when confronted with their error, the HOA president told my client it wasn't their responsibility." "Is that true, Mr. Moss?" Richard Moss looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, Mrs. Jenkins may have been in shock when she realized the error. I'm sure she didn't mean to suggest the HOA wasn't responsible for correcting the mistake." "I'd like to hear from Mrs. Jenkins directly," Judge Romano said. "Please stand, madam." Barbara stood, her face tight. She was wearing another blazer, this one navy blue with gold buttons, and her highlights looked freshly done. "Mrs. Jenkins, did you tell Mr. Armstrong that the HOA's error was not your responsibility?" Barbara lifted her chin. "Your Honor, I may have been flustered. It was a very confusing situation. But what I meant was that we had followed proper legal procedures as advised by our attorney and property management company. If there were errors in the paperwork they provided, we relied on their expertise in good faith. Did you personally verify the address of the property before filing for foreclosure?" "I'm the president of the HOA board, Your Honor, not an attorney. I trusted the professionals we hired to handle these matters correctly." Judge Romano looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Jenkins, foreclosure is one of the most serious legal actions an HOA can take. It results in homeowners losing their property. Did it not occur to you or anyone else on the board to personally verify that you were foreclosing on the correct house?" Barbara's face reddened. "We had numerous meetings about the Humphrey property. Everyone on the board was aware of the situation. We voted to proceed with foreclosure. We followed our governing documents and Arizona law." "Except you foreclosed on the wrong house," Judge Romano said. "Mr. Moss, I'm granting Mr. Armstrong's motion. The foreclosure order is hereby vacated, and I'm ordering the HOA to take immediate steps to clear Mr. Armstrong's title, including filing affirmative documents with the county recorder's office stating that no lien ever existed on his property. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Armstrong's reasonable attorney fees incurred in bringing this motion." "Your Honor," Marcus said, "we also have a pending lawsuit against the HOA for damages. We'd like to schedule that for trial." "I'm aware of the lawsuit, Counselor. We'll set a scheduling conference for next month. In the meantime, I strongly suggest the parties attempt to negotiate a settlement. This is exactly the kind of case that doesn't need to take up this court's time if the defendants are willing to fairly compensate the plaintiff for their egregious errors." Richard Moss nodded. "We'll certainly explore settlement options, Your Honor." As we left the courtroom, Barbara brushed past me without making eye contact. Richard Moss stopped Marcus in the hallway. "Marcus, let's talk settlement. My clients want to resolve this quickly." "Then they shouldn't have tried to steal my client's house," Marcus said. "But sure, let's talk. My office, tomorrow at 10. That night, I met Eric for dinner at a steakhouse in Old Town Scottsdale. I filled him in on the hearing while we waited for our food. I still can't believe she tried to act like it wasn't her fault, Eric said. She's the one who's been pushing for aggressive enforcement of the rules. Everyone knows it. Her attorney is going to try to settle, I said. Marcus thinks they're worried about what will come out in discovery. Like what? Like whether this was really just an accident or whether there was something more intentional going on. Marcus wants to depose everyone involved, look at all their internal communications, see if anyone raised concerns about the address and got ignored. Our steaks arrived, and we ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Eric said, "What about Dorothy? Is she going to be okay?" Her attorney got the foreclosure case dismissed because she was never properly served, but she still owes the back fees. Marcus's colleague is trying to work out a payment plan with the HOA. They're probably too embarrassed to push back after this mess. You'd think, but Barbara doesn't seem like the type to back down. The settlement conference the next day was tense. We met at Marcus's office in downtown Scottsdale, a sleek modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. Richard Moss arrived with Barbara Jenkins and another board member, a man named Kenneth Pritchard, who served as the HOA treasurer. Marcus laid out our demands. Mr. Armstrong is seeking compensation for his attorney fees, which currently total $23,000 and will continue to accrue if this goes to trial. He's also seeking compensation for damage to his credit and title, emotional distress, and lost business opportunities. Lost business opportunities? Richard Moss asked. Mr. Armstrong is a consultant who works internationally. His business depends on his reputation and his ability to travel freely. Having a foreclosure on his record, even a wrongful one, affects his ability to secure contracts and maintain relationships with clients. He's already had to explain this situation to his business partners and potential clients. That was true. I'd been on 3 conference calls with clients and potential clients who'd run background checks or credit reports and seen the foreclosure filing. Each time I'd had to explain that it was a mistake, that it was being corrected, that it wouldn't affect my ability to perform my work. It was humiliating and damaging to my professional reputation. "How much are we talking about?" Richard Moss asked. $250,000, Marcus said. Barbara made a choking sound. "That's absurd. It was a simple mistake." "A simple mistake that could have cost my client his home," Marcus said calmly. "A simple mistake that required him to hire an attorney, go to court, and defend his property rights. A simple mistake that damaged his credit, his title, and his business reputation. And let's not forget, Mrs. Jenkins, that you told him it wasn't your responsibility when confronted with your error." "I was in shock," Barbara said. "You're trying to bankrupt our HOA over a misunderstanding." "No, Mrs. Jenkins. I'm trying to hold your HOA accountable for wrongful foreclosure, which is a very serious legal matter in Arizona. If we go to trial, we're going to ask for punitive damages as well. That could easily push the verdict over $1 million. Richard Moss held up his hand. "Let's all take a breath. Marcus, $250,000 is not realistic. The HOA has insurance, but they're not going to pay that kind of money for what was genuinely an administrative error." "Then make me a realistic offer," Marcus said. $50,000, full release of all claims. We'll also agree to never fine or pursue Mr. Armstrong for any violations of the CC and RS for as long as he owns the property." I nearly laughed. "You want to pay me $50,000 and in return, I can park my trash cans wherever I want? That's your offer?" Kenneth Pritchard spoke for the first time. He was a portly man in his 60s with a red face and thinning gray hair. "Mr. Armstrong, please understand that the HOA is a non-profit organization. Our funds come from homeowner assessments. If we pay out a large settlement, that money comes from your neighbors, people who had nothing to do with this mistake." "Then maybe you should have been more careful before you tried to foreclose on someone's house," I said. "This isn't my problem. You created this situation." "We're offering you $50,000 in total immunity from HOA enforcement," Richard Moss said. "That's a generous offer considering the circumstances." Marcus shook his head. "We're not interested. See you at trial." We ended the meeting and walked back to Marcus's office. He poured himself a coffee and offered me one. "They'll come back with a better offer," he said. $50,000 was a lowball to see if you'd bite. They're scared." "Good. They should be scared. Xavier, I need to be clear with you about something. If we go to trial, there's always risk. A jury might not award you anything close to $250,000. They might decide this was just an unfortunate mistake and award you only your actual damages, which would basically be attorney fees and maybe a little for emotional distress. But there's also a chance they'd award more, right? There is. If the jury is sympathetic and we can show that the HOA was grossly negligent or acted in bad faith, they could award significant punitive damages. But it's a gamble. I want to gamble. I want to send a message that you can't do this to people. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we prepare for trial. I'm going to need you to be available for depositions, to help me gather evidence, and to be ready to testify. This is going to consume a lot of your time and energy. I understand. Over the next 2 months, I learned more about the American legal system than I ever wanted to know. Marcus filed extensive discovery requests, demanding every document related to the foreclosure, every email and text message between board members, every policy and procedure the HOA had in place for handling delinquent accounts. What we found was damning. The property management company the HOA hired, a firm called Desert Property Solutions, had repeatedly warned Barbara and the board that they needed to verify the property address before filing foreclosure documents. There were emails from the company's attorney suggesting they personally inspect the property and confirm it was the right location. Barbara had responded to these concerns by saying the board didn't have time to micromanage every detail and that the management company should just handle it. When the management company's paralegal noticed the address discrepancy between lane and drive, she'd sent an email asking for clarification. Barbara had replied, "It's the same property. File the paperwork." Marcus was ecstatic when he showed me these emails. "This proves they were warned," he said. "They had multiple opportunities to catch the error, and they chose to ignore the warnings and push forward anyway. This isn't negligence. This is willful misconduct." We also discovered that the HOA had a history of aggressive enforcement actions. Over the past 3 years, Barbara's board had filed liens on 17 properties and pursued foreclosure on 4, including Dorothy Humphrey's house. They'd fined homeowners for violations ranging from having the wrong color flowers in their gardens to parking commercial vehicles in their driveways overnight. Several homeowners had complained to the board about Barbara's enforcement tactics, but she dismissed the complaints as coming from troublemakers who don't respect the community standards. Marcus deposed Barbara, Kenneth Pritchard, and the other 3 board members. I sat in on Barbara's deposition, watching her squirm under Marcus's questioning. "Mrs. Jenkins, you received an email from Desert Property Solutions asking you to verify the property address before filing the foreclosure documents. Is that correct?" "I received many emails. I don't recall that specific one." "Let me show you Exhibit 42. This is an email dated September 15th from Jennifer Marks at Desert Property Solutions. She writes, "Barbara, I noticed the property records show Desert Bloom Drive, but the deed description references a lot on Desert Bloom Lane. Can you verify which is correct before we file?" "Do you see that?" "Yes." "And how did you respond?" "I told her to file the paperwork." "You didn't verify the address first?" "I assumed she had the correct information. That's what we pay them for." "But she specifically asked you to verify it because she noticed a discrepancy." "I was busy. I trusted her to figure it out." "You were busy. So you didn't bother to verify that you were foreclosing on the right house?" "That's not what I said." "But that's what happened, isn't it?" Barbara's attorney objected, and the deposition went on for 3 more hours. By the end, Barbara looked exhausted and angry. Marcus looked satisfied. We also deposed the property manager, Jennifer Marks, who turned out to be a star witness for our side. She testified that she'd warned the HOA board multiple times about the address issue, that she'd recommended they personally inspect the property, and that Barbara had overruled all her suggestions. "I told them at least 3 times that we needed to verify the address," Jennifer testified. "Mrs. Jenkins kept saying we were wasting time and money. She wanted to move forward with the foreclosure as quickly as possible. She said Mrs. Humphrey had been thumbing her nose at the community by not paying her fees, and she wanted to make an example of her." "Did that concern you?" Marcus asked. "Yes. Foreclosure should be a last resort, not a punishment. But the HOA board made the final decisions, not me. As the trial date approached, Richard Moss contacted Marcus again about settlement. This time, the offer was $125,000. We'll also agree to implement new policies and procedures to prevent this from happening again, Richard Moss said, and we'll make a formal apology to Mr. Armstrong. Marcus presented the offer to me over lunch at a cafe near his office. It's not $250, but it's a solid settlement, he said. You'd walk away with about $90,000 after fees and costs, and you'd have the satisfaction of knowing they're changing their policies. What happens to Barbara? I asked. She'd probably stay on the board. HOA boards are elected by the homeowners. Unless she's recalled or chooses to resign, she'll keep her position. Then I'm not interested. I want this to go to trial. I want a jury to hear what she did and hold her accountable. Xavier, there's something else you should know. I've been doing some more digging into the HOA's finances. They have insurance, but their policy has a $200,000 cap for wrongful foreclosure claims. If a jury awards you more than that, the HOA would have to pay the difference out of their reserves. So they only have about $300,000 in reserves. If you get a big verdict, it could bankrupt the HOA. That means special assessments on all the homeowners to rebuild the reserves. Your neighbors would end up paying for this. I thought about Eric and the other people in the neighborhood who had nothing to do with Barbara's power trip. But I also thought about Dorothy Humphrey, who'd nearly lost her house because Barbara wanted to make an example of her. If the homeowners don't like it, they can elect a new board, I said. Maybe that's what needs to happen anyway. Marcus nodded. Then we go to trial. The trial began on a Monday morning in early June. The courthouse was busy, lawyers and clients crowding the hallways, cases being called and continued and settled at the last minute. We checked in and waited in a conference room for our case to be called. When we finally entered the courtroom, I saw Barbara and the other board members sitting in the gallery. Kenneth Pritchard looked nervous. Barbara looked defiant. The other board members just looked tired. Jury selection took most of the first day. Marcus wanted jurors who owned their homes, who understood the importance of property rights, and who would be sympathetic to the idea that an HOA had overstepped its authority. Richard Moss wanted jurors who would see this as an honest mistake and be reluctant to award large damages. We ended up with a jury of 8 people, 5 homeowners, 2 renters, and 1 retired school teacher who lived in a condo with a homeowners association. Marcus seemed pleased with the mix. Opening statements were Tuesday morning. Marcus stood before the jury in a dark suit and explained what the case was about. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about what happens when an organization that's supposed to serve a community instead becomes a weapon against that community. The defendant, Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, attempted to take Mr. Armstrong's home through foreclosure even though he had never missed a single payment. They filed false documents with the court. They obtained a foreclosure order through fraud or gross negligence. And when they were caught, their president told Mr. Armstrong it wasn't their responsibility. This case is about holding them accountable for those actions and making sure it never happens again. Richard Moss gave a very different picture in his opening. This was a mistake. A regrettable, unfortunate mistake. But nothing more. 2 properties had similar addresses. Paperwork got confused. The HOA corrected the error as soon as it was discovered. Mr. Armstrong was never actually harmed. He wasn't evicted. His house wasn't sold. His credit wasn't damaged. This is a case about a lawyer trying to turn a small mistake into a huge payday. The first witnesses were technical ones. The county recorder who testified about the foreclosure filing, the title company representative who explained how the foreclosure would have affected my title, and a credit expert who testified that foreclosure filings can damage credit scores even if they're later vacated. Then Marcus called me to the stand. I testified about the morning the sheriff showed up, about Barbara's refusal to take responsibility, about the stress of defending my property rights and explaining the situation to my clients. I talked about lying awake at night wondering if there were other mistakes in the HOA's records, if they might come after me again for something else. Richard Moss Cross examined me aggressively. Mr. Armstrong, you were never actually evicted, were you? No, but only because I was home when they showed up. If I'd been traveling for work like I usually am, they would have changed my locks and taken possession of my house. But that didn't happen, did it? Only by chance. You testified that you explained this situation to your clients. Did you lose any clients as a result? Not directly, but I had several awkward conversations where I had to defend my credibility. So you didn't actually lose any business? I lost time and peace of mind. How much is your peace of mind worth, Mr. Armstrong? Marcus objected, and the judge sustained it. But the point was made. Richard Moss was trying to convince the jury that I hadn't really been damaged. The next day, Marcus called Jennifer Marks, the property manager. She testified about the warnings she'd given the HOA board and Barbara's dismissive responses. She came across as professional and credible, and I could see the jury paying close attention. Then, Marcus called Barbara to the stand. She walked up confidently, smoothed her skirt, and sat down. Marcus started gently, asking about her role as HOA president, her duties, her understanding of foreclosure procedures. Then he showed her the emails. Mrs. Jenkins, this is the email where Ms. Marks asked you to verify the property address. You responded, "It's the same property. File the paperwork." Do you remember that? Yes. Did you verify the address before telling her to file? I trusted the information we had. That's not what I asked. Did you personally verify the address? No. Did you ask anyone else to verify it? No. Did you drive by the property to make sure it was the right one? No. So when Ms. Marks specifically asked you to verify the address because she'd noticed a discrepancy, you just told her to file the paperwork without checking anything. I was confident in our records. Your confidence was misplaced, wasn't it? Obviously, there was an error. Marcus paused, letting that hang in the air. Then he pulled out another exhibit. Mrs. Jenkins, this is an email you sent to the board in August. You wrote, "We need to make an example of Dorothy Humphrey. She thinks she can ignore the HOA and face no consequences." Do you remember writing that? Barbara shifted in her seat. I may have been frustrated with the situation. You wanted to make an example of Mrs. Humphrey? I wanted people to understand that the rules apply to everyone. By taking her house? By following the legal process for unpaid assessments. But you didn't follow the legal process, did you? You foreclosed on the wrong house. That was a mistake. A mistake you were warned about multiple times and chose to ignore. I didn't choose to ignore anything. There was a miscommunication. Marcus spent another hour hammering away at Barbara's testimony, showing email after email where she'd been warned about problems, where she'd pushed for aggressive action, where she'd dismissed concerns from the property manager and even from other board members. By the time he was done, Barbara looked shaken. Richard Moss tried to rehabilitate her on redirect, but the damage was done. The trial lasted 5 days total. Both sides presented expert testimony about damages, about HOA practices, about what should have been done differently. Marcus called a homeowners association expert who testified that Barbara's actions were far outside the normal standards of care and that no reasonably prudent HOA board would have proceeded with foreclosure without verifying the basic facts. Richard Moss called his own expert who testified that mistakes happen in complicated legal processes and that the HOA acted in good faith based on the information they had. In closing arguments, Marcus laid it all out for the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard 5 days of testimony about how the Sunset Ridge HOA tried to take Xavier Armstrong's home. Not because he'd done anything wrong, not because he owed them money, but because they were careless, reckless, and more concerned with making an example of someone than with following basic procedures. They were warned, multiple times, and they ignored those warnings because Barbara Jenkins was more interested in flexing her power than in protecting the homeowners she was supposed to serve. Now you have the opportunity to hold them accountable, to send a message that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. We're asking you to award Mr. Armstrong $250,000 in compensatory damages, plus whatever amount you think is appropriate in punitive damages to make sure this never happens again. Richard Moss gave his closing argument, emphasizing that it was just a mistake and that Mr. Armstrong is trying to profit from an unfortunate error. He asked the jury to award only actual damages, which he calculated at about $30,000 for attorney fees. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I paced the hallway, drinking bad coffee from the courthouse vending machine, checking my phone obsessively. Marcus tried to keep me calm, but I could tell he was nervous too. Finally, we got the call that the jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. Barbara and the other board members took their seats. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The clerk read the verdict. We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Xavier Armstrong, and against the defendant, Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $320,000. I felt my heart jump. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. The clerk continued, we further award punitive damages in the amount of $200,000. Barbara made a sound like she'd been punched. Kenneth Pritchard put his head in his hands. Richard Moss just stared at the jury in disbelief. $520,000, more than double what we'd asked for. Judge Romano thanked the jury and dismissed them. Then she turned to Richard Moss. Counselor, I assume you'll be filing post-trial motions? Yes, Your Honor, Richard Moss said weakly. Very well. We'll set a hearing for those motions in 30 days. In the meantime, I'm ordering the HOA to post a bond for the full amount of the judgment to protect Mr. Armstrong's interests pending appeal. We left the courthouse in a daze. Marcus was grinning from ear to ear. That was incredible, he said. The jury got it. They understood exactly what happened, and they wanted to send a message. What happens now? I asked. Now, the HOA's insurance company pays their policy limit, which is $200,000. The HOA has to come up with the other $320,000, plus the attorney fees the judge will award us. That's going to drain their reserves, and then some. They'll probably have to do a special assessment on all the homeowners. How much? Depends on how many homes are in the HOA, but it could be $2,000 or $3,000 per household. I thought about Eric and my other neighbors getting hit with a surprise bill because Barbara couldn't follow basic procedures. But then I thought about what Marcus had said during the trial. Sometimes the only way to change a system is to make it painful for the people who support that system. They elected her, I said. They can deal with the consequences. Over the next few weeks, the verdict made local news. A reporter from the Arizona Republic interviewed me about the case, and the story ran with the headline, HOA ordered to pay $520,000 after foreclosing on wrong house. The story detailed Barbara's aggressive enforcement tactics and included comments from other homeowners who'd been fined or threatened by the Sunset Ridge HOA. The publicity was brutal for Barbara. Homeowners started demanding her resignation. An emergency meeting was called to discuss the special assessment, and over 200 people showed up. Eric recorded the meeting on his phone and sent me highlights. Barbara tried to defend herself, claiming the verdict was an injustice and that the HOA had done nothing wrong. She blamed the property management company, the attorney, everyone but herself. The homeowners weren't buying it. You tried to take someone's house, one man shouted, over a mistake you were warned about, and now we all have to pay for your incompetence. This is exactly why I moved to a neighborhood with an HOA, a woman said sarcastically. So I could get hit with a $3,000 bill because the board president doesn't know the difference between a lane and a drive. By the end of the meeting, Barbara, Kenneth Pritchard, and 2 other board members had resigned. Elections were scheduled for the following month, and a slate of candidates ran on a platform of responsible governance and respect for homeowner rights. Richard Moss filed post-trial motions arguing that the verdict was excessive and not supported by the evidence. Judge Romano denied all of them. The HOA's insurance company paid their policy limit of $200,000 directly to Marcus's trust account. The HOA board, now composed of new members elected in the emergency election, agreed to pay the remaining $320,000 in installments over 3 years. Marcus negotiated a payment plan that included interest, and I ended up receiving monthly checks from the Sunset Ridge HOA for the next 36 months. After paying Marcus's fees and costs, I netted about $360,000. I used some of the money to take a long vacation to New Zealand, somewhere I'd always wanted to visit. I donated $50,000 to a local legal aid organization that helped homeowners fight wrongful foreclosures. The rest I invested, figuring it would be nice to have a cushion for the future. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was knowing that Barbara Jenkins no longer had the power to terrorize my neighborhood. The new HOA board implemented policies requiring board approval for any foreclosure actions, mandatory property inspections before filing legal actions, and annual audits of the property management company's work. They also established a grievance committee where homeowners could appeal fines and enforcement actions. Dorothy Humphrey worked out a payment plan for her back fees and kept her house. She sent me a handwritten thank you note that I kept in my desk drawer. Eric threw a party to celebrate the verdict, inviting half the neighborhood. People I'd never met came up to me to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the HOA. "You did what we all wanted to do," one man said. "You held them accountable." A few months after the verdict, I got a phone call from an attorney in Phoenix who'd read about my case. She represented a homeowner in a similar situation, and she wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify as a witness about my experience. I agreed, and over the next year, I ended up testifying in 3 different cases involving HOA overreach and wrongful foreclosures. Marcus and I became good friends through the process. He started specializing in homeowner rights cases, and his practice grew significantly as word spread about our victory. He called me one day to tell me he'd been contacted by a producer who wanted to make a documentary about HOA abuses. "They want to feature your case prominently," Marcus said. "Are you interested? Will it help other people avoid what I went through?" "That's the idea." "Then I'm in." The documentary was released about 18 months after the trial. It featured interviews with me, Marcus, Jennifer Marks, and several other homeowners who'd been victimized by aggressive HOAs. It also included footage from Barbara's deposition, which made her look exactly as bad as she'd been. The documentary sparked a conversation in Arizona about HOA reform. Several state legislators proposed bills to increase oversight of HOAs, require better training for board members, and create an ombudsman office to handle homeowner complaints. Not all of the bills passed, but some did, and I testified before the state legislature about my experience. Standing in the legislative chamber, telling my story to elected officials who had the power to change the system, I felt like I'd come full circle. What had started as a terrifying moment when a sheriff knocked on my door had become something bigger, a movement to protect homeowners from the kind of abuse I'd experienced. 3 years after the verdict, I was sitting in my backyard by the pool, working on my laptop and enjoying the Arizona sunshine. My business was thriving. I'd just signed a major contract with a Singapore tech company, and I'd recently started dating a woman named Penelope Rhodes, who I'd met at one of Eric's parties. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey, Xavier, how are you?" "Good. What's up?" "I just got a call from Richard Moss. Barbara Jenkins is filing for bankruptcy. She's claiming the verdict ruined her financially." "How?" "The HOA paid the judgment, not her personally." "True, but she's been hit with several other lawsuits from homeowners claiming she acted beyond her authority. Plus, the special assessment cost her $3,000, and apparently she took out a loan to pay it, and now she can't keep up with the payments." "That's rough, but she brought it on herself." "Agreed. But here's the interesting part. In her bankruptcy filing, she lists you as a creditor. She's claiming you owe her money because the verdict was excessive, and she plans to appeal it." I laughed. "Is she serious? The case is over. The appeals period has passed. She lost." "I know. Her filing is frivolous, but I thought you'd want to know she's still out there blaming everyone but herself." After I hung up, I sat by the pool thinking about everything that had happened. 3 years ago, I'd been terrified of losing my home. Now, I'd not only protected my home, but helped change the system that had threatened it. Barbara Jenkins had tried to use the HOA as a weapon to punish people she didn't like, to enforce her vision of what the neighborhood should be, regardless of the cost to actual homeowners. And she'd been held accountable for it in a way that sent ripples through every HOA in Arizona and beyond. People sometimes asked me if I regretted buying a house in an HOA community. The answer was complicated. I hated that I had to deal with rules about trash cans and paint colors and what kind of flowers I could plant. But I also believed that communities need some shared standards, some way to maintain property values and resolve disputes. The problem wasn't the concept of an HOA. The problem was people like Barbara who saw the HOA as a way to control their neighbors instead of serve them. And the solution wasn't to eliminate HOAs, it was to hold them accountable when they overstepped, to ensure they followed the law, and to give homeowners real power to fight back when their rights were violated. That's what my case had done. It had shown that homeowners could win against an HOA, even when the HOA had lawyers and court orders and the power of the covenants behind them. It had shown that juries would hold HOAs accountable for wrongful foreclosures and award real damages, not just token amounts. And most importantly, it had shown other homeowners that they didn't have to just accept whatever the HOA did to them. They could fight back. They could win. Eric came over later that evening with beer and steaks for the grill. We sat by the pool as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. "Did you hear Barbara's filing for bankruptcy?" Eric asked. "Marcus called me. She's still blaming me for her problems." "Of course she is. That woman has never taken responsibility for anything in her life." Eric took a drink of his beer. "You know what's funny? The new board is actually doing a good job. They repaved the common areas, fixed the pool heater, organized a really nice 4th of July party. Turns out when you elect people who actually want to serve the community instead of control it, things work better." Imagine that. I'm serious. You changed this neighborhood, Xavier. People actually go to board meetings now. They pay attention to who's running for the board. They ask questions and demand accountability. That never would have happened if you hadn't stood up to Barbara. I just didn't want to lose my house. Yeah, but you could have settled early. You could have taken the $50,000 and walked away. Instead, you took it all the way to trial and made them pay for what they did. That took guts. I shrugged, but I knew he was right. It had taken guts. It had also taken money, time, and an enormous amount of stress. There had been nights when I'd wondered if it was worth it, if I should just take whatever settlement was offered and move on with my life. But every time I'd thought about giving up, I'd remembered that morning when the sheriff knocked on my door. I'd remembered Barbara's smug face when she told me it wasn't the HOA's responsibility. I'd remembered Dorothy Humphrey, who would have lost her house if the HOA had filed the foreclosure correctly. And I'd known that I had to see it through, not just for me, but for everyone else who'd been victimized by an out-of-control HOA. We grilled the steaks and ate by the pool, watching the stars come out over the Arizona desert. The house that Barbara Jenkins had tried to take from me was still mine, the mortgage-free deed locked in my safe deposit box at the bank. And the $500,000 judgment I'd won was a reminder to every HOA in the state that homeowners have rights, and those rights have real teeth. Penelope joined us later, bringing dessert from a bakery downtown. She worked as a civil rights attorney, and she'd been fascinated by my case from the moment we met. "Marcus told me about the bankruptcy filing," she said. "Barbara's attorney is apparently trying to argue that she was acting in her capacity as HOA president and shouldn't be personally liable for anything." "Will that work?" I asked. "Probably not. The judgment was against the HOA, not her personally. But the other lawsuits might be different. If homeowners can prove she acted beyond her authority or in bad faith, they might be able to pierce the corporate veil and go after her personally." "Couldn't happen to a nicer person," Eric said. We talked late into the night about HOAs, property rights, and the balance between community standards and individual freedom. Penelope had strong opinions about how HOAs were often used to enforce discriminatory practices, how they'd been created in many places to keep out people of color and maintain segregation even after it became illegal. "Your case was about a wrongful foreclosure," she said, "but it's part of a much bigger pattern of HOAs being used as tools of exclusion and control. The fact that you won, and won big, sends a message that there are limits to that control." As I listened to her talk, I realized that my case had become bigger than me. It was a symbol, a precedent, a story that other people could point to when they felt powerless against their HOAs. And that felt good. It felt like something that mattered. The following week, I got an email from a law student who was writing a paper about wrongful foreclosures. She wanted to interview me about my experience. I agreed, and we talked for over an hour about the case, the trial, and the impact it had on HOA practices in Arizona. What would you tell someone who's facing a similar situation?" she asked at the end of the interview. I thought about it for a moment. "I'd tell them to document everything. Save every email, every letter, every payment receipt. Take photos and videos. Keep a journal. Because if it comes down to your word against the HOAs, you want to have proof. And I'd tell them not to be afraid to fight back. HOAs count on people being too intimidated or too tired to stand up for their rights. But you can win. It's expensive and stressful, but you can win. Any regrets? None. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was worth it. After the interview, I sat in my office looking out at my backyard. The landscaping I'd invested in, the pool had built, the custom patio furniture I'd bought. All of it was still mine because I'd been willing to fight for it. Barbara Jenkins had thought she could take my house with a court order and a sheriff. She'd thought the law was on her side, that homeowners were powerless against the machinery of the HOA. She'd been wrong. And now, every month when I received that check from the Sunset Ridge HOA, I was reminded that justice wasn't just an abstract concept. It was real. It was tangible. It was $520,000 in damages paid by an HOA that had learned the hard way that you can't foreclose on the wrong house and get away with it. The attorney I'd faced down at my door that morning, Marcus Chen, had become more than just my lawyer. He'd become a friend and an ally in a movement to reform how HOAs operated. We'd been invited to speak at conferences, to testify before legislatures, to share our story with anyone who would listen. And people were listening. HOAs across Arizona and beyond were changing their practices, implementing safeguards, training their board members better. Not because they'd suddenly become more ethical, but because they were afraid. Afraid of being the next Sunset Ridge HOA, the next $500,000 verdict, the next cautionary tale about what happens when you violate homeowner rights. Fear was a powerful motivator, and in this case, it was motivating positive change. I finished up some work emails and headed inside. The house was quiet, peaceful. My house. Bought with my money, owned free and clear, protected by the law and by my willingness to stand up for my rights. Barbara Jenkins was filing for bankruptcy, blaming me for her financial troubles. But she'd brought those troubles on herself by trying to take what wasn't hers, by ignoring warnings, by treating homeowners like subjects in her little fiefdom instead of neighbors she was supposed to serve. The last I'd heard, she'd moved out of the neighborhood entirely, couldn't afford the special assessment, couldn't face the neighbors who knew what she'd done. She'd listed her house for sale and left Arizona for somewhere in Nevada. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd had every opportunity to do the right thing, starting with that morning when the deputy realized the address was wrong. She could have apologized. She could have offered to make things right. She could have taken responsibility. Instead, she told me it wasn't her problem, and that decision had cost her everything. Meanwhile, I was still here, still living in my house, still running my business, still fighting for homeowner rights whenever I got the chance. And every time I told my story, I ended it the same way. HOAs need to be held accountable when they violate homeowner rights, not because I say so, but because a jury of my peers awarded me $520,000 to prove it. That's not just a verdict, that's a message. And the message is clear. You cannot foreclose on the wrong house and expect to get away with it. You cannot treat homeowners like enemies to be conquered instead of neighbors to be served. You cannot prioritize your power trip over people's homes and lives. The American legal system isn't perfect, but sometimes it gets things right. My case was one of those times. Justice was served. The wrongdoers were punished, the victim was made whole, and then some. And that's exactly how it should be. As I stood in my kitchen that night, looking out at the home I'd fought so hard to keep, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because I'd won, but because I'd stood up for what was right. I'd refused to be bullied. I'd refused to accept that a clerical error could cost me everything I'd worked for. And in refusing to accept that injustice, I'd created something bigger than myself. I'd created a precedent, a story, an example for others to follow. I'd shown that homeowners aren't powerless, that HOAs can be held accountable, and that the law will protect people who stand up for their rights. That was worth more than any dollar amount. That was worth everything. It was worth